I had just blown out the candles on a cake I didn't even want. 50 years old, half a century of life, most of it spent building a marriage, a home, and raising children who now live too far away to see the truth. As I opened the neatly wrapped envelope, my husband slid across the dining table, smirking like he was handing me a love letter. I felt a strange chill, even though the fire was crackling in the background. I remember thinking, he didn't even write happy birthday on it. It wasn't a card. It wasn't a surprise trip or sentimental note. It was divorce papers. Cold, clean, filed and dated. "I think it's time," he said calmly. "We've grown apart. I've met someone else. I didn't want to ruin your day, but, well, you deserve the truth. The truth. On my birthday. After 27 years. In the house I helped pay for, decorated, cooked in, bled for, and I didn't scream. I didn't cry, not then anyway. I just nodded, picked up the papers, and said, 'All right.' He looked confused. I think he expected rage, maybe begging. Maybe I was supposed to collapse in a heap, broken. But all I felt in that moment was a slow, smoldering clarity. I had loved him deeply, but he'd made his choice. And now I would make mine. Because if he thought this house, this life, this story was ending with him walking off into the sunset, he didn't know me at all. He was going to get exactly what he asked for, and a twist he never saw coming. My name is Elaine. I'm 50 years old, and for most of my adult life, I was known simply as his wife. Not Elaine, not the woman who ran a successful side business from our sunroom, not the mother who held our family together through cancer scares and college tuitions, just his wife, a background character in his story. We met in our 20s, married by 30, and now 2 grown kids, a mortgage, and a lifetime of shared history later. He served me a fresh start disguised as abandonment. The timing wasn't a mistake. He gave me those papers on my birthday for a reason. It was a message. You've reached your expiration date. Time to make room for someone newer, younger, lighter. And God, it worked. For a few weeks, I felt exactly that. Expired. I remember waking up the morning after, the house strangely quiet. He'd gone to stay with a friend to give me space. What he really meant was he wanted me to start packing, to make this easier on him. He assumed I'd fall apart, but the silence gave me room to think. The first few nights were the worst. I didn't eat much. I kept reading and rereading those papers, trying to figure out what part of me made him decide I wasn't enough anymore. But in between the waves of grief, something started to settle. A different kind of silence, one that wasn't empty but waiting. There's a strange kind of power in realizing the worst has already happened. Once you've been discarded by the person who promised forever, you either shatter or you shape yourself into something new. I chose the latter. I met Mark at a mutual friend's barbecue on a sweltering July afternoon. I was 26, fresh out of a bad breakup, and swore I wasn't ready to date. But Mark, charming, confident, with that boyish smile and perfectly rehearsed vulnerability, had a way of making me feel seen. He asked about my dreams instead of my job. He laughed at all the right moments. He remembered little things I said and repeated them days later like gems he'd been holding on to. After years of dating men who barely noticed when I changed my hair, his attention felt like sunlight. It moved quickly, too quickly. By month 4, he'd all but moved into my apartment. By the end of the year, we were talking about houses and kids. I remember telling my sister that he felt like home, like safety. She raised an eyebrow, said, "He seems a little intense." I brushed it off. I called it passion. Looking back, I see the signs. The small possessiveness masked as protection. "I just worry when you go out late, babe." The way he gradually made me feel guilty for spending time with friends. How my dreams of opening a floral boutique were cute, but not practical. It started with love notes and turned into ledger sheets, what he paid for, what I owed him emotionally. After we got married, the shift was subtle but constant. He praised me in public and criticized me in private. He didn't hit, didn't yell, didn't cheat, at least not at first. Instead, he eroded me, made me question my memory during arguments, told me I was overreacting, rolled his eyes when I spoke about things that mattered to me. I was the overly sensitive wife, the one who read too much into things. When our children came along, I threw myself into motherhood, partly because I loved them fiercely, partly because I needed somewhere to feel needed. Mark became more distant, more focused on his career and his image. At dinners, he would tell jokes at my expense. In front of his friends, I became Elaine the worrier, or Elaine the one who still thinks she can start a business. But I stayed, because that's what good wives do, right? We sacrifice. We keep the family afloat. We love even when it hurts. Besides, I told myself, he wasn't cruel. He just didn't understand me anymore. And maybe that was my fault too. I lived like that for years, justifying, enduring, swallowing down my disappointments like pills, until my 50th birthday when he stopped pretending altogether. And as I sat at that table, holding the divorce papers in my hands, I realized I had spent over 2 decades shrinking myself for a man who never really loved me, only the control he had over me. The unraveling didn't start with the divorce papers. It had started long before. I just hadn't allowed myself to see it. The divorce was simply the final thread being yanked free, the loudest crack in a foundation that had been splintering for years. After Mark moved out, I began going through the house, not to pack, but to take inventory, not just of the things he left behind, but of all the tiny moments I had ignored. I found an old birthday card from 5 years ago, unsigned. A receipt tucked in the back of his desk drawer from a hotel on a weekend I'd been visiting my sister. My name wasn't on the reservation, neither was his. The more I allowed myself to dig, the more I found. Passwords he forgot to delete, emails that confirmed what I'd suspected. There was another woman. She wasn't younger, but she was newer. Someone from his office. Someone he'd been seeing for nearly 2 years. He had built a whole second life while I was still baking lasagnas and ironing his shirts. And he had the audacity to say, "We grew apart." What stung more than the infidelity was the manipulation. He hadn't just betrayed me, he'd constructed an entire narrative where I was the problem, the emotionally unstable wife, the one who lost herself in motherhood, the one who stopped trying. I read texts between him and her, laughing at how I still believed he worked late. I wasn't even angry at her. I didn't know her. But him? The man I once trusted with my body, my dreams, my entire youth? He wasn't just lying. He was rewriting history. I confronted him once. Just once. He stopped by to pick up a few of his things, and I calmly handed him a folder of printed emails and photos. He laughed. "Are you really going to dig through my personal stuff now? That's low, Elaine." Low. As if I was the one who had crossed a line. That's when I realized he truly believed he was entitled to it all. The affair, the house, the moral high ground. He thought walking away on my birthday gave him the upper hand, like he was controlling the narrative until the very end. But I didn't raise my voice. I just smiled. I told him I would sign the divorce papers. And then I quietly got to work. Because while he had been investing in his fantasy life, I had been investing in something else. Myself. In my own name, in my quiet strength, and in legal counsel, he didn't even think I had the sense to hire. He thought I'd hand him the house out of guilt or grief. What he didn't realize was that I had been documenting everything. Every lie, every withdrawal from our joint account, every business decision he made without my consent. He thought I'd go down silently. He had no idea I was just getting started. There's a quiet moment that comes after betrayal, when the anger fades just long enough for the truth to settle in. It doesn't scream, it doesn't crash, it whispers. And in that silence, I finally heard myself again. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, reheating leftover soup. Nothing extraordinary. The same kitchen where I had once baked cupcakes for our kids' birthdays, where I had waited late into the night with a bottle of wine slowly warming, hoping he'd come home and sit with me like he used to. This time, though, I was alone, and I wasn't waiting for anyone. I stood by the window watching the late autumn leaves swirl in the yard, and I realized I didn't miss him. I didn't miss his voice, his footsteps, the way he'd leave the bathroom lights on. I didn't miss the small jabs, the silent dinners, or the way he never asked how I was. What I missed, honestly, was the idea of him, the version I had loved long ago, but that man hadn't existed in a very long time. The realization hit me like a breeze after a long fever. I had spent so many years clinging to the past, to the role I played, to the identity that came with being someone's wife. But standing there, soup spoon in hand, I felt something rare. I felt light. He had left me, humiliated me, lied to me, and still I was here, breathing, thinking, planning. That's when I made the decision. I wouldn't just survive this. I would rebuild, but not out of vengeance or bitterness, out of necessity, out of self-respect. I deserved a life that didn't revolve around someone else's approval. I deserved a space where I could breathe without holding back tears. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since my 20s. I reached out to friends I'd pushed away. I met with a financial advisor and a lawyer, 2 women, incidentally, both of whom had gone through similar betrayals. They didn't offer pity. They offered blueprints. The most important meeting, though, was with myself. I sat down and asked, really asked, what do I want now? Not what Mark would approve of, not what my kids expected, not what society said a 50-year-old woman should settle for, but what I wanted. And slowly a new vision formed, not built on anger, but clarity. I didn't want to fight for the marriage. I didn't want to win him back. I wanted peace. I wanted freedom, but I also wanted him to understand, without a single scream or slammed door, what it felt like to be underestimated. That's when I started drafting my own plan, one that looked like surrender on the surface, but was anything but. He wanted the house. Fine. He could have it. I just needed a few things in return, and he wouldn't realize what I'd done until it was far too late. I told him he could keep the house. I watched the relief wash over his face like I'd handed him a gift. He nodded with that smug little half-smile of his, trying to hide just how pleased he was, as if he'd finally gotten what he wanted without having to fight me for it. I told him I didn't want to drag things out, that I wanted to move on in peace, that I was tired and just ready to be done, all of which was true, just not in the way he assumed. He didn't know that for the past 3 months, I'd been working with my lawyer to document every financial misstep he'd made during the course of our marriage, every secret bank account, every expense that clearly benefited his affair, every shady withdrawal from our joint savings. I wasn't just giving up the house, I was giving him something far more dangerous, the illusion of victory. And while he packed for his new life, I filed a quiet motion with the court. It was called dissipation of marital assets, a phrase I hadn't known 6 months ago, but had since come to cherish. It meant that if a spouse wastes or hides money in anticipation of divorce, the other spouse can claim compensation. I had the proof, and I had the patience. I also rewrote the house title transfer agreement with one tiny clause he never noticed, because he didn't read it. He trusted that I wouldn't be clever enough to touch legal documents without him. That clause stated that while the house would be in his name, I would retain 50% of the equity value to be bought out within 60 days. If he failed to do so, the property could be legally forced into sale, and I'd be entitled to half of whatever it sold for. He signed it with a flourish, too distracted planning weekend getaways with his new woman to notice the trap. And then came the best part. I sold the house. Well, technically, the bank did, after he failed to refinance and buy me out within the deadline. Turns out, financing a mortgage on a single income with a recent affair scandal at the office doesn't look great on paper. He begged, pleaded, offered to work something out, said I was being vindictive. But I was done being the fool in his story. I told him calmly that everything he was losing was simply the result of choices he made while I was still holding us together. I used my share of the sale to buy a small cottage on the coast. Nothing extravagant, but it was mine. Fully paid for. Sunlight hit the windows differently there. I planted herbs outside the kitchen, started painting again, and slept in sheets I chose for myself. He, meanwhile, had to move into a rental an hour outside the city. I didn't gloat, I didn't celebrate, I just breathed. Because the sweetest revenge isn't destruction, it's dignity. Sometimes, when the wind moves just right through the curtains of my new home, I close my eyes and think about the woman I used to be, the one who flinched at raised voices, who folded herself into corners to keep the peace, the one who measured her worth by someone else's attention, someone else's approval. I grieve for her, but I don't miss her. What happened to me wasn't fair, it wasn't kind, and it certainly wasn't what I imagined my 50th birthday would look like. But in that strange, painful unraveling of everything I thought I needed, I found myself. Not the wife, not the fixer, just me, Elaine. A woman who rose from the ashes not with fire, but with quiet certainty. People talk about revenge like it has to be loud, like it needs to come with screaming or courtrooms or shattered glass. But my revenge didn't live in chaos. It lived in calm, in carefully drawn boundaries, in legal precision, in walking away without looking back. I didn't need him to hurt the way I had. I only needed to remember that I had the power to choose myself, something I hadn't done in years. And once I did, everything changed. Now, when people ask me why I seem so at peace, I smile. I sip my coffee. I watch the ocean. And I tell them the truth, because I finally stopped trying to be enough for someone who never wanted to see me fully. And I finally became enough for me. If you've ever been left behind, betrayed, or underestimated, and still found the strength to rise again, this story was for you. Drop a red heart in the comments to remind someone they're not alone. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of healing, justice, and the quiet power of choosing yourself.